So far, we have understood SQL in terms of retrieving the data. Now, what is the meaning of retrieving the data? That is collecting the data, fetching the data, and giving some or the other result set in the outcome. But where does this retrieval happen? From a pre-created database which was there in our end. So, what if I want to make my own database? What if I want to do some other operations such as updating the database or updating the database objects or tables and so on? So, what could be taken into consideration and how SQL is going to be helpful over there for us? So, we will be understanding the commanding part of SQL today. So, what is commands in SQL? What are the various types of commands and how each command would be helpful for us in terms of doing different operations? So, we will begin with understanding first what is commands. So, when I talk upon SQL, SQL is a hybrid language. Now, what do you mean by something called as hybrid language? Hybrid languages are those languages which is a combination of multiple languages taken into consideration. Now, how come SQL is a hybriding language? Now, the language which we understood earlier was nothing but data query language, which means interacting the data or querying the data in order to generate some results. Are there any other languages which makes SQL one of the most powerful language to talk with this relational databases? Let's try to understand those. Now, when I talk upon commands, commands means instructions. Now, what are instructions? Instructions means I want to give some or the other commanding part to my SQL or to my SQL server to tell that, okay, this is what you have to perform. These are the instructions which you have to take into consideration. So when I talk upon SQL commands are nothing but instructions. Now, what are instructions? Giving some or the other task for my MySQL server or any of the SQL server to perform or relate to some operations. Now, it is used to communicate with the database. It is also used to perform certain tasks, functions, and queries of the data. So it's not only does some instruction, but it also gives some of the outcomes or some of the queries will be resulted and some functionalities would be taken care of over here in terms of commands. Now, SQL can perform various tasks like creating a table, creating a database, adding a data to a table, dropping a database, or modifying the tables. Then, also we can do is set permissions for the particular user in order to see what kind of data is being permitted to what kind of user and when do we give the access of the data and when the access of the data is taken back ahead. So when I talk upon commands in SQL, before understanding command, I told you that SQL is nothing but a hybrid language. Now, meaning of hybrid language means that SQL is a combination of multiple languages which are there. So in SQL, as you can see on my screen, that there are 5 commanding languages. The very first stands as DDL, the second stands as DML, the third is DCL, the fourth is TCL, and the fifth is DQL. Now, when I talk upon the very first language, DDL. Now, DDL stands for Data Definition Language. Now, what is the meaning of that? Let's say if I give a command of defining a data. Now, what is the meaning of defining a data? Defining a data means defining its structure, defining its layout. So, that is a meaning and purpose of something called as definition. So, DDL or Data Definition Language or data definition commanding language is used to define the data. Now, whenever the word comes define, it deals with something called as structure or the layout of the particular database object or any of the thing into the database. Now, in those DDL, we have 5 major commands. The very first is create, second is alter, the third is drop, the fourth is truncate, and the fifth is rename. Now, at many other instances, you'll always see create, alter, drop, truncate. Rename is something which is added as an extra part. We will see rename, that what is the purpose of it and why do we use rename as a command. So, when I talk upon DDL as a commanding language, it is used to define a data with 5 major commands. The very first is create, alter, drop, truncate, and rename. So, that was about DDL. We will be studying each of the commands in detail in the further sessions. So let's see and talk upon DML in short. Now when I talk upon DML, D stands for data, L stands for language, and M over here stands for manipulation. Now, what is the meaning of manipulation? Now, manipulation is nothing but changes. Now, what kind of changes do you require? The changes could be in terms of adding new rows, eliminating certain rows, or modifying certain existing data. So, when I want to do manipulations is nothing but changes or modification. For that, I will use a commanding language known as DML. Now, DML doesn't deal anything with respect to structure. It deals everything related to the values which are stored within the structure. That is nothing but the table data or the table rows which are being inserted. So, when I talk upon DML, the manipulation part would consist of three major commands. The very first is insert, then there is drop, and then there is something. The very first is insert, then we have update, and then we have something called as delete. So the three major commands which comes in DML is insert, update, and delete. So now proceeding further with the next commanding language which we have is nothing but DCL. Now what is the meaning of DCL? D stands for data, C stands for control, and L stands for language. Now when I talk upon data and language, and the C over there means control. Now, what is the meaning of control? Control means setting the permissions, setting the privileges that who can see the data, to whom the data needs to be given, and how much the data needs to be given, and when we can take the data which is given. For an example, everyone must be having some online OTT platforms, use cases, or applications installed at your end. Obviously, those kind of applications are giving you access to their data. Imagine I have Netflix subscription, and tomorrow I go and put in my user ID and password and I open the Netflix. You can see the data has been granted to me. Now, what kind of data they have granted to me? They have granted data related to the series, movies, shows, and many other things which are there, but they have not given me access of their entire data. They have given access of the limited data to me. Now, this access also consists of some restriction. What kind of restriction do you think so? That whenever I open Netflix, I can see the series, I can watch the series, but I cannot make the changes. I cannot delete the series which is there, which means the access which is granted to me is with respect to certain privileges. There is a control being maintained that how much data should be going, to whom the data should be going, and what amount of data should go in order to maintain the integrity or in order to maintain a proper use case of data. So definitely when a Netflix shares a data to me with a particular user ID and password, they are giving me data to just view. They are not giving me data to update, and they are not giving the entire data as well to me. They might be having data related to how many customers have enrolled to their platform related to that, or they might have data how many customers have left the platform, or they might have data related to the revenues which are there. So they are not going to share that data with me, but they are going to grant me the access of the data only with certain limited amount and limited set of restrictions. So that is the meaning of control which the people do take into consideration into the real world. So when I talk upon data control language, the controlling command, that is the privileges and permission command of the language, is related to how much data should be going, what kind of data should be going, who should be able to access the data, and when should we take back the data which is given. So the data control language has two commanding parts. The very first is grant and the another is revoke. So grant is used to grant the permissions of the data, and revoke is used to take back all the given permissions which are there. So that was DCL, known as Data Control Commanding Language. Now when I talk upon TCL, the next commanding language, now I know the T stands for control, C stands for control, L stands for language, but the T over here stands for nothing but transactions. Now what do you mean by something called as transactions? Now in the real world, if I ask you what is transaction according to you, you'll definitely say that money is debited from one account and credited to another. That is the meaning of one transaction which has happened into the normal finance world. But when I talk upon transactions with related to the database, the transactions would be insert, update, and delete. So whenever the transactions are happening, that is whenever the DML commands are being permitted or DML commands are taken into consideration, now those commands are not auto-committed in nature. Now what does it mean? Not auto-committed means they are not permanently saving all the changes. The DDL which we studied were auto-committed in nature. Auto-committed means whatever task we do, that is permanently stored into the database or into the server. You cannot undo the task, but when it comes to DML, it's not auto-committed, which means the tasks are not permanent. You have to undo the task. You can implement lots of undo operations over there. So in terms of maintaining the control of those transactions, which means control of insert, update and delete, or particularly I can call it control of the DML commands, we use something called as transaction control language. Now, as I've said earlier, transaction in the database is nothing but the insert, update and delete operations which happen. So when I'm controlling those commands, when I'm controlling those parts, for that we have major commanding languages such as, or major commands used such as rollback, commit, SAVEPOINT. So we have rollback which will undo the task, SAVEPOINT which will create multiple temporary checkpoints, and commit which will make all the changes permanent into the system. So that is when we will use something called as TCL. So then coming to the last one, that is nothing but DQL. When I talk upon DQL, DQL stands for data query language. The meaning of data query language is, now you know data means a set of information. Language is a mode of communication. Now what is a query over here? Query is nothing but a request for data from the database. So when I want to ask for some data which is pre-createdly stored into the database server, I'll definitely use something called as DQL, known as data query language. Now in the data query language, we have the major command over there known as select. So select is used to select certain operations, select certain values and then give something or retrieve something or access something in the output, so that the output result would be shown as per the requirements, as per the criteria. So far we have studied DQL with lots of clauses such as select, from, where, having, group by, order by, limit, distinct and so on. So we will be understanding all the rest of the commands in detail in the upcoming sessions. But when I talk upon SQL commands, commands are helpful in order to maintain or give instructions to SQL that what to do, what amount of outcome do you do, or what amount of instructions you want to give to the MySQL server to perform one or the other task. So that was all about the SQL commands. Now we will be understanding more commands in details in the further session.